Hey, welcome to our Living Well seminar. We're so glad that you're able to join us. As we know that everything has changed since COVID-19, and so we recognize that it's okay not to be okay, but that God wants to help us, and we have some really smart people, some real experts in some specific areas that we're just kind of inviting to have a conversation and to share with you and with us how we can survive this, and not just survive it, but actually really thrive in the midst of all of this. And so I'm really pleased that we have Chantelle Dockter here. She's a licensed professional therapist. I got that right?
Licensed professional counselor, yeah.
Professional counselor, okay. And work with Christian Counseling Centers of Oregon and Washington, and are part of our staff here kind of in Northwest Christian Church, and work at the campus at Tigard. And so thankful that you're joining us. Chantelle, you've done a couple other workshops for us on self-harm, and work especially with young people, but can you kind of maybe share a little bit about what your expertise is in?
Yeah, having a private practice, I see different people, but I've gravitated towards working with teenagers a lot, and then adult women of all ages with women's issues. But teenagers, I never sought out to work with teenagers, and somehow along the way it just clicked, and I work, I would say at least half of my caseload is working with teens, and that includes all the high-risk issues that come with that, all the relationship issues, so.
Well, that works out perfect, because in the midst of all this COVID-19, we're just kind of concerned about young people, obviously. How are young people handling this different than, say, their parents or grandparents, those kind of things?
Yeah, I would say that, for young people, for teenagers especially, they are faced with different things than adults are, in the sense of a couple different areas. The first one being, as adults, we've faced a lot of different hard things in our lives. We have a series of things to draw from, to know that, okay, this is hard, but it will end at some point, it will get better at some point, there will be something else at some point that is not as scary. And teens, a lot of times for teens, this is one of the first things that is really hard for them. And so they don't have the skills, the coping skills, they don't have the tools in their toolbox to use that adults do. And being that this is maybe one of the hardest things that they have had to go through, and because there's no time limit, that no end date, right. They have a hard time looking forward to knowing that this is going to go away. That's one of the things.
Okay, so what are some of the emotions that you're seeing from young people, and what are they experiencing, and how do we kind of help them deal with some of that?
I'm seeing a lot of teens that are coming in very anxious, and also very depressed. And so some of that is reaching clinical, terms, and then others are more just sad and worried and nervous, and not so much necessarily about COVID itself.
Sure.
I would say more about, there's some that are, but more about they're very, very sad about what they're missing. There's some really important milestones that are being missed by a lot of kids right now, especially with seniors. I've seen a lot of seniors lately that, graduation, prom, sports, even my own girls who are middle school, outdoor school, Washington, D.C. trip, sports meets that, they're having to miss. And they're sad about that. They're grieving that.
So how do you help them deal with that?
I think the first thing that I try to do, and I encourage parents to do, is to really, first of all, just listen and validate. I think one thing that adults try to do sometimes is we try to let them know, well, but you have it better than a lot of people, or here are the things you do have. And, although those things may be true, we're not then meeting our kids where they're at. And I know even at my home, with my two girls, at one point several weeks in at a dinner table, both girls, had some tears to shed. And my husband and I just listened of, tell me what this is like for you. What are you missing? What is hardest about this? And those things are very different than the adult concerns. And sometimes as adults, we're worried about finances, we're worried about jobs, we're worried about how do you homeschool and work at the same time. And these are very big things, and they are very big things. And so sometimes I think we can look at kids and maybe not take the things they're worried about as seriously, or the things that they're missing. So I just really encourage, and that's what I do in my practice, is like, hey, let me meet you where you're at. What's hard about this?
Okay. And
once they're able to share and they know that you empathize and you're not trying to fix it or kind of throw things their way to make them feel better, that's a good place to start.
Okay, that's great. I really appreciate hearing that. Also with parents then, I mean, if you see tears, obviously we know something's wrong, but some students are good at internalizing things, or maybe there's some other signs. What should we be looking for as parents for our young people so that we can be a little bit more aware of what's going on in their life?
Right. I think several things. First of all, I mean, all teens have some mood swings, right? So some of that is normal, but if you start to see, more of a drop or a lot more irritability on a consistent basis, it's a red flag to pay attention to. Again, all kids like to spend some time in their room, and that's normal and fine. But if you're going days without seeing much of your kid, or they're not wanting to shower or do like the daily things they would normally do, if all of a sudden they're not wanting to even talk with their friends virtually, they're more withdrawn, more isolated, that's a concern as well. If they're making comments about, suicide, not wanting to be here anymore, you always want to take those threats very seriously and kind of unpack that. And if that's the case, if you're seeing those things, or if a child if their sleeping and eating patterns have changed drastically. Now, that being said, I know a lot of kids are staying up later, things are off a little bit, but if all of a sudden your child is sleeping way more or way less than normal, or they're eating way more or way less, those are just kind of nonverbal indicators that something's going on. And a good thing for parents to do, obviously, is to check in with their kid and just be very open, be a good listener. And then if you are concerned that your child is in distress, then you would want to act on that rather quickly, because for teens, depression and anxiety can spiral a lot quicker than even adults.
Oh, that's good.
And so, which can then lead to, suicide, which is a huge risk. And so, a good thing to do would be to contact the pediatrician, as well as getting a counselor. And counselors many of them are still meeting with clients in person. A lot of them are doing telehealth, so there's options to go ahead and get started on that versus waiting until all this lifts.
Now, I know we talked to you a little bit beforehand, but you're really swamped. I mean, what are the rest of the counselors? I mean, how do you get into a counselor when it seems like the need is really immediate?
Yeah, I am very busy, and I know a lot of my associates are, but we just do our best to try and get people in with, like, if somebody calls me and I can't get them in, and if they don't want to wait, or they can't wait, shouldn't wait. That's the nice thing about having an association too. I can reach out to one of my associates and see, who has openings, who has transitioned off of some clients and is willing and able to take on some more. So, and if the case happens where there isn't somebody in our association, then I can always reach outside of that as well. So we really try to, not leave people hanging and get somebody connected with.
So you can help us get connected
Absolutely.
with them. I know that we've had you come in and talk about cutting before and some of those self-harm things. Are you seeing more of that? And then what should we be aware about in that?
I haven't necessarily seen a drastic spike in that. I've seen kind of higher levels, I think, of eating disorders lately. And with that, there is also some cutting, as well as substance abuse. I think teens, when they're feeling the way they're feeling, and then if they are having more alone time, even under quarantine, people can still find a way to get what they need. Especially a lot of times parents are very, spread very thin. They're trying to attend to a lot of things. And so, I have seen a rise in that, because a lot of it is about control, right? Sure. And so when you feel out of control, as I think all of us do, we can either, draw on those healthy coping skills, or we can go in the direction of trying to find control in areas that maybe seem okay at first, but then turn on us, and it ends up being an unhealthy thing.
And I know we've had conversations before, I think even a workshop about social media. Mm-hmm. I mean, in this era now, we're more isolated, but we're using more social media, which also sometimes drives the depression and anxiety. So any advice for that? I
think my biggest advice would be for parents to continue to monitor on some level where their kids are going when it comes to being online. Just because they're under your roof does not mean that they're safe. It does not mean that they're not entering into this other world, that there's a lot of, there's things that parents don't even know. just on the topic of eating disorders, there's a lot of sites that are pro eating disorders that teach your kids how to have eating disorders on a deeper level, and there's music geared towards that, and I mean that's a whole nother conversation. But again, if you're not aware of that, I had a couple clients I was talking to recently about that, and so they're spending time in their room. We assume they're doing homework, or we assume, and again, it's even my girls, I trust my girls, but they know that I'm going to spot check their phones. I'm going to look at their history. I'm going to, just because that's my responsibility as a parent to make sure they're safe. So I think when there's a layer of accountability there, it helps.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate that. But before we go, is there anything else that you think that parents should know, or is there any advice you would give to young people also while we have them here on this Living Well seminar?
I have a couple things, if that's okay. First of all, for parents, just to recognize that kids are really grieving, talking about the emotions, coming back to that. When there's some things that we've had to cancel as adults too due to this whole thing. But a lot of times, vacation or work event, we can postpone those things. But again, back to the milestones, there are things that these kids are not able to postpone. They're not able to ever go back to. And so I think allowing space and time for that grieving, because whenever there's change, there's loss. And whenever there's loss, there's some level of grief, whether it be big or small. And so that's important to know. Another thing is, I think one of the reasons this is hitting kids harder too is because they're at a developmental level where it's appropriate for them to be kind of growing more independent from their parents and their families, and more dependent on their social interactions and their friends and their peers. And so, you and I went through this, your kids went through this, it's normal, it's natural. This pandemic has really interfered with that, and it's thrown it off kilter. And so that's something to be aware of too. And to that I would say, encourage your kids to still have connections with, and virtually. I know it's not the same. My girls have kind of pushed back on some of it because it's not what they want to do, but it's better than nothing.
Right.
And so encouraging those social, one of my daughters plays basketball and they're doing some workouts via Zoom. And at first, it's like, well, it's not the same. It's not the same, but it's still something. And I notice that even if they complain about those things, afterwards their mood is a little bit better. And the last thing I would say is just really a helpful thing would be to still have some type of structure. I think all of us, but especially, kids and teens do better when there is a structure, when there's a schedule. So one thing that this has thrown is that, kids are used to getting up, going to school, going to sports. We're busy, busy, busy. And although the downtime I think is really good on one end, it's caused us to slow down. I think there's, God's working in all of us in different ways. And at the same time, to go from one extreme to the other is very difficult. And so I think I've noticed that kids and teens are doing better if they're, getting up around the same time every day, even if it's a little normal than school would be, getting into their online schooling, getting that done earlier rather than later, still having, some type of bedtime, even if it's later than it normally would be, getting physical activity, having at least 30 minutes of doing something physical, getting outside. So those are the things I would encourage parents is to, as best you can, it can be structured yet flexible.
Right. Well, again, thank you so very much. Appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and put a couple resources back up on the camera so that make sure that they know about Christian Counseling Centers of Oregon and that. And if there's any other resources you think we should have out there, we'll put those up there as well.
Perfect.
So thank you again for joining us. We're so thankful for Chantelle and so thankful for so many that have been helping us out. We want all of us to be able to live well, and we're going to be able to do that with God's help and with each other's help as well.